welcome back to All Things Lord of the Rings with your host Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone. A quick little note before I get into things. I want to announce that because Twitch.tv is allowing uploads now, I will be uploading this and other future videos to Twitch as well as here on YouTube. If you want to subscribe to my Twitch channel, very simply, just go to twitch.tv/SolanusDracone and hit that follow button. You'll find my videos list on the video tab on top of the page. Come to think of it, maybe subscribe here on YouTube as well? I'd be ever so grateful. Picking up the story where we left off, Fingolfin marched into Beleriand as the moon came up, and came to Mithrim as the sun rose for its one pass from the west. The Grey Elves of Mithrim greeted him warmly, but there was still one small challenge. The language of the Calaquendi had diverged in the thousands of years since they went west. The Noldor spoke the elven language of Quenya, while the people of Elwë, now called Thingol, spoke Sindarin. This doesn't really become an issue or source of conflict, it's just a cool little factoid, a nice detail. The Elves of Mithrim were excited that their cousins from over the sea had come, and thought that they were sent by the Valar to help against Morgoth, even though that wasn't exactly the case. They didn't know what had happened back in Alqualande and Ahriman with the betrayal and the ship burning and whatnot. While Fingolfin was still coming along, the sons of Fëanor were approached by an emissary from Morgoth and offered a truce, that if they'd leave him alone, he'd leave them alone, and even give back one of the Silmarils. Naturally, his fingers were crossed. Maedhros appeared to accept and go treat with Morgoth, but his fingers were crossed too. So when he went to go meet with Morgoth, he was ambushed by Balrogs and held hostage, to be released in exchange for the Noldor kindly fucking off. Fingers still crossed. The sons of Fëanor, both bound by their oath and knowing full well Morgoth was a dirty liar and would have his fingers crossed, refused to treat with him. In response, Morgoth hung Maedhros by his wrist from one of the spires of Thangorodrim to suffer. Fingolfin went to go see the situation at Angband, and because the sun had risen, the hosts of Morgoth had fled underground, and so he was able to get right up to the gates of Angband without any trouble. He and his people banged on the gates and blew their horns to challenge the dark foe, but Morgoth wasn't about to answer that challenge, and so he and his army stayed well underground, thank you very much. Maedhros heard Fingolfin's people and tried to call for help, but they couldn't hear him from way up where he was. Fingolfin wasn't the hothead that Fëanor was, however, so he decided not to press the issue at the time, and turned around to go set up a bit of a stronghold on the north side of Lake Mithrim. Fingolfin's patience had been stretched too far, however, and he and his people were still pissed off at Fëanor's people. It came pretty close to battle, but Fëanor's people knew they were way outnumbered, so they uprooted their own camp and made their new place on the south shores of Lake Mithrim. A lot of Fëanor's people were sorry for what had happened, and would have gone to try and make friends, but they were too ashamed to go face Fingolfin's people. So this time they could have spent making up and consolidating their forces was wasted. Another aspect of the doom of Mandos. Now, there was one particular person who had a level head about the situation. Remember Fingon, son of Fingolfin? He was a pretty badass warrior and was also pretty tight with Maedhros. As you'll remember from a previous episode, Maedhros had asked if they were going to go get Fingon before Fëanor flipped the bird and burnt the ships. Fingon wanted the two different sides of the Noldor to make up and get together because they needed each other to stand a chance in the coming war. It was about this time that Morgoth had sent up his foul mists and vapors and whatnot to block out the light of the sun from Angband. Fingon found out about Maedhros' imprisonment, and though he didn't know that Maedhros had spoken up in his favor at the burning of the ships, he still remembered their long friendship and decided he was going to do something badass and go get Maedhros. He went off on his own without checking in with anyone, and came up to the gates of Angband. Since everything was in darkness, he was able to climb up the spires of Thangorodrim and get a good look around. Shit was pretty miserable, and he couldn't find Maedhros or even find a way to get into Angband, so since he wanted to do at least something ballsy before he gave up, he took out his harp and began to sing a song of the Valar that the Noldor had made before Melkor started sowing all this bullcrap in their heads. And he sang it loud and proud because screw you, Morgoth, and all your pissant little orcs. Maedhros heard this song and yelled down to Fingon. Hearing his old friend cry out, he went up to try and save him, but he just couldn't possibly climb high enough to reach Maedhros. Maedhros begged to be put to death because he was so miserable up there, and Fingon sadly agreed. He put an arrow to his bow and sent forth a prayer to Manwë, asking him to please speed this arrow along and help release Maedhros from his torment, and have pity for the Noldor in their hour of need. Manwë heard this because he was still keeping watch with his eagles. The Valar had never really forsaken the Noldor. They genuinely wanted the children of Ilúvatar to do well as a whole, and so Manwë sent the Lord of all Eagles, Thorundir, to come help Fingon out. Thorundir arrived just as Fingon was about to let the arrow loose, and instead of killing his old friend, he rode up on Thorundir's back. There he tried all he could do to get the shackle off of Maedhros' wrist, but it just would not come off or even budge. It was too strong and too evil. Maedhros begged once again to just die, but Fingon wasn't having it. With no other option, he cut off Maedhros' hand and brought him back to the Noldor. Thusly, Fingon's deed managed to somewhat heal the rift between the two parts of the Noldor. Maedhros, being Fëanor's eldest son and by technicality the one who had the rights to kingship over the Noldor, renounced his claim in favor of Fingolfin. Most of the elves on both sides were cool with this, except for quite a few of the other sons of Fëanor. The doom of Mandos hung heavily upon them. Thusly, with the hosts of the Noldor reunited, for the most part, Fingolfin became king of the Noldor in Beleriand and started to send out emissaries to begin gathering together the elves of Beleriand, as well as setting up a watch on the west of Angband. King Thingol, the elf formerly known as Elwë, lived in his city of Menegroth, in the kingdom of Doriath. Because Morgoth had come to Beleriand pretty far ahead of the Noldor, and had already instigated the First Battle of Beleriand, called aptly enough the First Battle of Beleriand, Thingol had become a bit reclusive. His wife, Melian the Maya, set up a powerful enchantment around the forests of Doriath, which came to be called the Girdle of Melian. This enchantment made all the forests seem like labyrinths of confusion, and made it impossible for anyone to enter Doriath without permission. From Fingolfin's emissaries, only one was allowed through the Girdle, Angrod, son of Finarfin, who had stayed with Fingolfin on their march across Helcaraxe. This was because the princes of the Noldor of Finarfin's house were related to Thingol, as their mother was Eärwen of Alqualande, the daughter of Thingol's brother Olwë. Angrod and Thingol spoke for a long time, and Angrod had held back certain information, like the kinslaying and the doom of Mandos and the exile of the Noldor and whatnot, because why in the hell would you ever tell anyone about that? Thingol was still pretty wary of the Noldor, but he agreed to let them live in the lands of Hithlum, which is where Lake Mithrim was, and the highlands of Dorthonion, east of Doriath. He was not going to have any of his own people displaced, and he would not allow anyone into Doriath unless they were personally invited as a guest, or if they came to him in great need. He was all, "Remember, I'm still the king of Beleriand." The lords of the Noldor held council in Mithrim, and when Angrod returned and gave Thingol's terms, the sons of Fëanor were a mite ticked off at his tone. Maedhros laughed, however, and said, hell, he wouldn't be a proper king if he didn't protect his people. He's giving us lands where his power doesn't go, and shit, because of us he's able to hold Doriath in the first place. Let him have Doriath and be grateful we're up here protecting his ass. We'll go wherever we want elsewhere. This didn't sit well, however, with Caranthir, Maedhros' brother. Caranthir was the most hot-headed of the bunch, and was all, why the hell are we allowing the sons of Finarfin to call the shots? Why are we dealing with this dark elf in his shitty caves? They're talking about Thingol. Y'all better recognize that you're sons of the Lord of the Noldor, even if your mother was Teleri. This ticked Angrod off quite a bit, and he turned and left the council. Maedhros told Caranthir off, but the damage had been done. The people of the Noldor began to believe that any one of the sons of Fëanor could turn rogue at any time, given their oath, and say some damn fool things, or worse. Maedhros recognized this, and decided to go ahead and leave Mithrim with his brothers to the lands around the Hill of Himring. This area was called the March of Maedhros, because it didn't have much in the way of natural protection on the north side, which was the direction of Angband. He wanted to be the one who bore the brunt of any of Morgoth's attacks, and keep a good relationship with the houses of Fingolfin and Finarfin, and he often went to go seek counsel with them. But as cool as he was still a son of Fëanor, and the oath still slept within him. And that's where we'll end today's episode. Thank you all for watching. Once again, I am Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone, and this has been All Things Lord of the Rings. Goodbye.